This is Bonjour Hi, the Stuff to the Gillers edition. I'm Avi Feingold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltz-Bovey. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk to author and critic Lydia Perovich about the aftermath of the Giller Prize Gala, the right way for arts and politics to interact, and the siloing of Jewish arts and artists. All this and more. Stay tuned. Phoebe, are you doing anything for Thanksgiving?
I am having a good old-fashioned Canadian work day because it is American Thanksgiving. So
Correct.
Business as usual here. How about you?
I am having everybody at home. People are upstairs watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade on TV. We are not hosting a Thanksgiving dinner, but we are having friends over for dinner. So we will get really stuffed, and we will have good times and cheer and maybe talk about being thankful, but we will not have turkey and cranberry and all of that. Since we last spoke, Rome has burned down, apparently. Montreal, not really, but everybody's pretending that it has. Last week we spoke about how Dawson and McGill and Concordia were having demonstrations. Mm-hmm. That led to a connection between the riots because of NATO. There was demonstrations that led to a larger rioting of some kind. Some cars were burned. Some people were hurt. I don't want to get too far into it. The only thing that I do want to say, though, that Justin Trudeau also should absolutely be allowed to enjoy himself at the Eras Tour with Taylor Swift, despite the fact that there is a riot going on, because you can't actually do anything as the Prime Minister.
Avi, you're defending something without talking about who you're arguing against. Were there people saying that it's bad?
Yes, including the entire Conservative Party of Canada. Pierre Poilievre was the one who put out a video that put these two things together and said, look at this, this is horrible happening in Montreal. This is disgusting. This is Justin Trudeau is sitting there, with his awkward dad dance moves at the Taylor Swift concert. And Canadaland was very good at pointing out the timeline and saying, hey, this concert started about an hour after the riots ended. And besides, there's not much you can do as the Prime Minister if something is going on in another city. This is not a federal thing. And people need time off. People need to be able to enjoy themselves. And sometimes as a Prime Minister, you get to take it whenever you can. And in the rabbinic world, you can't go and say, well, somebody might die, so I can't take time off because I have to go do a funeral. You go and take the time off when you can. And unless there's a true emergency, you leave it for other people.
So too, in the world of opinion writing and podcasting, sometimes you need to take a little time off.
Absolutely. On that note, right after these messages, let us hear from our guest, Lydia Perovich.
In Berlin, rumors are spreading.
Holocaust victims, their bodies are just dug up.
It's a shunda.
But the truth is even more unnerving.
Was your family in the Shoah?
Dude looks like he was in the Shoah.
As the world panics...
This is some ritual, bringing the dead back to life.
No, you said this wasn't illegal.
It isn't, I don't think.
One woman seeks the truth.
These are questions you can't answer.
And you're too afraid to even ask them.
Justice, a Holocaust zombie story. An original audio drama from the CJN in association with the Ashkenaz Foundation. Listen now at thecjn.ca/zombies or wherever you get your podcasts.
Lydia Perovich is an author and a journalist based in Toronto. Lydia wrote a piece last week on her Substack entitled The Giller Prize of the Future. It piqued our curiosity because we had been talking about the Gillers recently as well. And so we invited Lydia to come on and speak about it, as well as the topic of arts and politics in general. Lydia, welcome to Bonjour Hi.
Thank you so much.
As we had been discussing in the past, just to get everybody on board here, the Gillers are the main literary prize awarded in Canada to Canadian authors. I believe that's a good way of putting it.
Right?
Fiction specifically, correct. A good equivalent is to say it's the Booker Prize, but for Canada, or the National Book Awards. The Giller Prize was awarded. The evening did go on, not entirely without a hitch. There was a counter gala, I believe. They rolled out a red carpet. They dressed in, gala-worthy outfits, according to the Toronto Sun, and they did their own thing, but mostly, especially inside the room, it was done without a hitch. The winner was Anne Michaels for her book Held. She gave a speech, which she then put up onto Twitter. Lydia, what did you make of this statement, this speech, this award?
It was apologetic. It was strangely, I'm sorry to be winning this award, and this is what literature is for, so we can be united, so we can witness, so we can, and various other similar things. And somebody was really good on Twitter, I can't forget who it was, who said, why don't you just say you write because you want to write something, because it would kill you not to write something. And that's enough. You don't really have to say that literature is crossing bridges and uniting people. It isn't. I mean, that's way above our pay grade. And I have a lot of artists now think that they can solve social problems. You have theaters in Toronto now issuing statements that they want to solve social isolation. Like only that problem. So, of course, now you have all these groups that are forming against fossil fuels, against Israel. I was just looking at the multiple open letters and the multiple groups organizing themselves, I guess just so they could avoid writing, because the world problems need solving. And it's just wacko. Well, we can go into some of that. I just wanted to say a little bit about the Gillers, because fewer and fewer Canadians know about it. It was founded by Doris Giller and Jack Rabinovich, and when they passed away, a foundation was created. It's endowed, and it has a lot of sponsors. Most famous one is Scotiabank, which clearly asked for naming rights. It was called for the longest time Scotiabank Giller Prize. And it's run now, its CEO is their daughter, Ilana Rabinovich. And she's given a couple of interviews, largely stayed out of this whole thing, but she's been in touch with Madeleine Thien and various other winners who've tried to lobby her directly about Scotiabank. So the name is gone. And I'm neutral about it. I'm perfectly fine, because Scotiabank has naming rights over so many institutions in the city and organizations. There's a Scotiabank Contact Photography Festival. There's a Scotiabank Nuit Blanche. So
are you saying that the Nova Scotians control the media and the arts? And I never would have known.
No, it's not. It's actually a multinational bank that it just has a very old school name. But yeah, they invest, in other words, they invest a lot in the arts. I think BMO invests a lot in the arts too. As you probably know by now, we have oligopoly here when it comes to banks. We have 4 or 5 major banks, and people lobby them for funding of the arts, and some of them are still giving. So between, hospital wing and the arts, it's nice that people are still giving to the arts. They don't have to.
Phoebe, I know you didn't like the speech either.
I read the text of it on Twitter and then the replies, and it read like, don't hate me. I don't want anybody to be mad at me. I don't want you to be mad at me for being on one side or another side. I'm not going to really say anything. I'm going to throw a lot of words out that don't really say anything. Don't hate me, don't hate me, don't hate me. And nothing is bait on social media quite like don't hate me, don't hate me, don't hate me. So then I read all the replies, and you would think that this Canadian novelist was deciding exactly what to do in Gaza and was making all the determinations, and a lot of anger that could be directed at things that actually matter in the world is instead directed at making somebody feel bad for doing the entirely normal thing of saying, somebody wants to give me $100,000 for my novel. Fantastic. It is hard to make money in the arts, which is something you wrote about in your piece. And I want you to speak more to that.
I mean, the Writers Union of Canada that has it's Writers Trust, I think, that has a big award on its own. It's called the Hilary Weston, that was recently awarded. And everybody had to say, whoever was the winner, everybody had to say, stop the genocide, ceasefire now. It was fascinating. So Writers Union of Canada annually publishes the average income of writers in Canada, and it's currently around 6,000 or 7,000 just for writing. And I don't think the situation will be much different in the US and Britain, but it's in thousands of dollars. So this is the richest award, seriously. And so I see all of these open letters and all of these protests and kind of shaming of your artist colleagues and writer colleagues as sort of you're wrecking a very, very fragile literary ecosystem. CanLit did not exist some 60 years ago. It was very painstaking social engineering. University departments were created. Funders were founded. Bankers had to be persuaded to give money. And all of that can be wrecked in a generation. But a lot of these protesters, like, for example, Madeline T. and Omar El-Akkad, a bunch of other people, even Sarah Bernstein, they live abroad. So if you have an alternative, my point is, maybe not a very generous one, that if you have an alternative home to teach abroad, you don't really care if that's happening.
How does arts funding work in Canada in terms of grants and all of that? And more specifically, how much would an arts grant application have some kind of social justice component in like the aims of the art itself? I don't mean like necessarily the identity of the artist, but like, is there an expectation that the art be doing something beyond being good art?
As of late, yes. So the system is similar to the British system in that we have arts councils. But because this is a hugely decentralized country, you have 3 levels of arts councils: provincial, municipal, and federal. For musicians, for example, it's not a blind process. For the rest of them, it wasn't blind. For authors, for the longest, for example, on a Toronto level, it was a blind process. But I'm sure people know people. It's a small environment. But I hear now, and I know this, I think I've looked at it recently, there are DEI requirements shuffled in there somewhere, especially if you're an organization.
And when you say DEI, so this is something that I really want to get precise on. Is it that artists are supposed to come from a diverse set of backgrounds and they're like ticking a box of who they are? Or is it that they have to say that their art furthers the cause of diversity? One of these is kind of an HR question, right? Like a human resources question. The other is, it's more about like the art itself and what's expected of it.
Yeah, I think that is happening, but it's not blatant. Probably through this kind of jury appointment, but I'm not sure if there's anything in the application form that says, what is your novel doing about X? I don't think it's that blatant.
Here's a question, and I don't know if this helps or if it muddies things, but I looked at some of the visual arts schools in Canada and elsewhere, and I started noticing on their websites when they are recruiting students or just talking about their mission and vision, you might think that especially a school of visual arts would have as its goal to teach somebody how to do the process of art. And you start seeing, texts like, I went to OCAD, and OCAD has, 5 points on their website about stuff, about who they are and what they do. And they talk about like how to apply critical and reflexive thinking to theory and practice, making and knowing, respecting the interplay of poetics and politics. Or they say that they take inspiration from the call to decolonize the university and ourselves, and a commitment to transformational teaching and learning that recognizes and incorporates Indigenous knowledge. The Faculty of Fine Arts at Concordia talks about how they realize you can realize your creative potential through research and a diverse faculty, how to reflect on the zeitgeist and explore pressing topics like colonialism, sustainability, technology, and EDI. But I'll bracket that for a second. I just want to get some of your thoughts about like where schools fit into all of this.
No, but it's absolutely, that's a key thing. And in Canada, there's this program of indigenization that's been going on for a few years, especially acutely from 2020 on. It's cultural enforcing of certain topics and approaches, and even in physics and even in STEM and all that. I think they may, I don't know, once you establish it, if it's easy to go back, but the art schools have embraced it. And I think the CEO of OCAD was the person very much into decolonizing. So I guess it depends who's appointed the CEO, who's the middle management. But yes, I've looked at some of their instruction requirements. They always advertise for part-time faculty, and it's incredible. It's just like a whole list of political requirements sometimes. That's that self-censorship, I think it's a huge, how many times, almost every day, I either find a show that's old or read a book from 20 years ago or piece of art and thinking this would never be made today. It just would not see the light of day.
You mean like Lolita or Wagner or anything remotely problematic?
Or even comedy from 15 years ago, like Kids in the Hall. I was looking at some thinking, no, this really changed. And people are anticipating. That's really insidious what you say.
As I did the research for this topic today, at some point I was like, wait a second. Who are the right-wing artists? Who are the artists that are creating this art? It hit me that anybody who has a right-wing bent is not welcome at an art school. But part of it also was like that the right seems to almost be proud of the fact, and I wish I was wrong, of the fact that they don't consume art like that. We listen to these artists. We listen to this kind of music. We don't go to the opera. We don't buy Kara Walker's paintings. So it doesn't matter to us because she is wrong and she's evil. And then that further silos things. And I'd like to see a beautifully written right-wing novel to be able to convince me that I might be wrong about some of my ideas.
I don't think anybody wants that, I'll tell you. But no, I mean, like in the arts organizations.
In the arts organizations,
yes,
they don't. That's the problem.
But is the question, why isn't there more right-wing art, or just why isn't there more art that's not trying to make any particular political point?
I think that's
I think it's both. Yeah. I'd like to see both, because I think as long as we don't have, as long as the only art that people on the right buy is Thomas Kinkade, then we have a problem.
It's difficult. I mean, if a novel is great, you kind of can't pin it down. Is it right wing or left wing? It kind of leaves. These are long debates on whether the novel is the ultimate democratic form in which all the ethical viewpoints are aired equally, and you're not supposed to commit, because if you commit to one, it's sort of a propaganda. It's not a novel. So a lot of these great novels, 19th century novels, you have all these life forms, all these different ideologies that are jostling. But of course, in the 20th century, yes, you can find a lot of art that's the author is explicitly right-wing, or the work itself is explicitly. Ernest Junger and a bunch of people like Leni Riefenstahl, a bunch of people like that. Mm-hmm. You can have a neoliberal novel, for example. Like I've recently rewatched a TV show. I thought, this is very, very neoliberal. Everything about individual decisions.
Which TV show?
It's Being Erica. I mean, it's a tough one, but I think that's more like it. We got to stop demanding of art and literature to take a stand, to be progressive, to be this, that, and the, that will be better than just demanding right-wing novels.
The thing that I'm noticing with the art world, and this is why I feel like a term like wokeness doesn't quite cover it. It's just this, maybe Avi, I'm going to throw some Judaism in. Ready? That it's kind of like tikkun olam, repairing the world. That there's this notion that art is going to repair the world. It comes from a left-wing place, but it's almost, I feel like my own beef with it isn't so much political as in I think it's the wrong politics. Sometimes I think it's the wrong politics, not always, but more just that it's got to be doing something. You know what I mean? That it has to be like the engagé thing. Like it has to be like an engaged artist. And like Zola novels are that. They were engaged art, and obviously that's good art. It's not maybe the best art artistically is another topic. But like, yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say
Dickens too. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, it's not that, but I guess for me, it's just this question of like, do you have to be showing that your art is going to be doing something else? And does it have to be clear cut? And is it something you should be able to put on an application statement? I think one error that I think people make is assuming that if you are of a marginalized background, which broadly defined most people are in one way or another, because if you say it's all women and some men, then, it's a lot of people. If you say that, but if you're marginalized, you would want this. No, people do not want to be pigeonholed as activist artists necessarily. They don't necessarily want their art reduced.
I don't think that's
to some
true.
Kind
I think
of,
a lot of artists do want to be pigeonholed like that.
Now they do. Yes.
This is what I'm doing.
They want careers, and if that's what you need to do. But I don't know whether they want to. It's kind of a difficult question.
No, I hope that whoever's the heritage minister in the new government looks at these requirements in arts councils and just explicitly depoliticizes the whole thing. I think that's a good suggestion, Phoebe, and that's serious. It's really serious. Hours later than one thing. But it's interesting. We were kind of circling around the elephant in the room, which is gender in publishing and arts. So I was reading the other day Junot Diaz. And it was such a masculine prose that I something I forgot. Like that kind of a tone, you don't see that anymore. So maybe the argument that the white men have fallen through they're doing fine in literature. Like women have been dominated Anglo publishing for the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And so it's a little different now. But I miss voices like Junot Diaz. Only when you read him, you realize, oh, right, we're missing something here.
Well, maybe there will be a grant for the
oppressed minority of men, yeah.
And that's the thing that the white males are complaining about and saying, well, what about us? We're a beleaguered minority. And I am not siding with that at all, but that can't possibly be fun or fair for a white male who wants to be an ally, just wants to write art, wants to have nothing to do with, needing to politicize their art, and just wants to make something beautiful, but there's no space for them.
But isn't it part of this? Part of this, I think, is also who is likely to go into publishing. Publishing is the type of career that's, as I understand it, probably easier to have the lower earning spouse in a man-woman marriage, I would imagine. I think there are a lot of systemic reasons why I could imagine there would be more women in publishing. I don't know. That seems too.
I think one feeds. Yeah, I think one feeds the other, definitely. But I think it's interesting. The mid-management, even the upper management, are all women now in publishing, except for the CEOs. You still find male CEOs in large publishing companies. And it's news when somebody's appointed CEO at Penguin Random House, for example. That's always a talk of town. But men are leaving fiction in droves as readers. Are they leaving as authors? To a lesser degree. Something like that happened with publishing, but then men suddenly stopped. Not suddenly, but probably in the course of all of this, stopped reading fiction. They got interested more in video games or whatever, nonfiction. Men still read nonfiction, but they don't read fiction.
Can I ask one other thing, which is that we have not brought up the Jewish-specific angle. I'm wondering, in terms of the Giller split, it does not seem to have been an exact thing where, so a lot of discussion has been about anti-Semitism and the Gillers. It's been kind of the framing. But it seems to me, and Lydia, you could expand on this if you'd like, that there are some people who are protesting the Gillers who are Jewish, and some who object to the protests and who think the Gillers should proceed who are not Jewish. Please explain.
Yes, if you remember that big American open letter that had something like 200 people against Israel getting engaged with Israeli academic institutions, that had a high percentage of Manhattan Jews, for example. So I guess it's not news. There's a huge contingent of disagreement among Jewish people and Israelis about this. But I'd love to sit them down and ask them why they think Israel is the uniquely evil actor in the Middle East. I don't know. You tell me. Why are there so many Jewish signatories in these letters?
I think it's related to the fact that Israel-Palestine and the occupation versus the defense and whatnot is the cause of the day. And it seems a little silly that it is, but regardless of whether you think it is silly or not, or rightfully so, it is the cause of the day. And therefore, this has become the place where you show your moral fiber, is where you stand on Israel versus Palestine. And again, the Uyghurs, Russia, China, none of this matters. Nobody thinks about those right now except for what's going on in Israel and Palestine.
And do you think it's because there's such a big diaspora, both Arabic and Jewish, in North America?
The argument that I see again and again, and I follow a lot of people on social media who are extremely pro-Palestinian, and it seems to be pretty much about complicity, especially coming from the US. So a lot of it is like, why do we not care so much about this cause or that cause? Well, America is helping Israel. America is allied very closely with Israel. That's why. And that's the reason I see again and again. It's our tax dollars are going for this. This is we're being told this is the only democracy in the Middle East, that that this is Judeo-Christianity, all this, that it's being kind of sold. So I think that that's one area. The other, I'm going to be that person, and Avi's going to roll his eyes, is anti-Semitism. I think people like having Jews as an enemy, and that the whole no Jews, no news thing, it's cringe, but there's something to it. And yeah, I think that enters into it. And I think a lot of global conflicts, unless you personally have family ties to them, for the average North American, who knows? You don't know who's who. You don't know who to side with. You don't know who are the good guys or the bad guys, and you don't care for the typical North American. Whereas here, it's connected to something that's been known. Obviously shaking his head.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. Because the Israel-Palestine conflict has been in existence, since before the existence of the State of Israel, for the past, almost 100 years. Even if you look at the past 2 to 3 decades since the first Intifada, since the second Intifada, there has not been this level of anti-Semitism, despite the fact that Israel has been in the news for the Israel-Palestine conflict, until the scales got tipped and people started saying, "Yay, Palestine." So it's not so much down with the Jews. It's now we finally, as a polity, side with the Palestinians. And as a result, we have to have an enemy and we have to go contra something. And that happens to be the Jews in this case. And yes, it absolutely rolls into itself. And as we saw this week in Montreal, you have a pro-Palestinian individual who is shouting, the final solution is coming and throwing, Hitler salutes around and merging classical 20th century anti-Semitism with anti-Israel, sentiment in a way that is really ugly and deeply problematic. But the roots of this isn't necessarily anti-Semitism. It's just a symptom of what's happening here, because for so long, people were like, clucking about the Palestinians, but they weren't necessarily saying, oh, but the Jews are doing this. It's, oh, the Jews get to defend themselves, until the narrative got really switched over. And that's what I'm seeing happening.
And another factor that was important in Canada is the decolonization discourse. It's a huge. It's the main dividing line in Canada. The way black and white is in the US, it's settler indigenous. And so a lot of people are connecting that to as if it's completely identical.
Well, I think that's been very interesting, and I think it's been a way of cleansing oneself of the settler guilt, is to say there's this one group of settlers who are the really settlery settlers, and that's Jews. And I think
they are not settled enough.
Yes. And by the way,
that's some of it.
That's one of the reasons why you saw historically the Quebecois people aligning themselves with the Palestinian cause years and years before it was chic to do so, because they were a separatist movement, and they identified with all other separatist movements, including the Basque and the Scottish, whoever else decided that we needed to separate, we needed to have our own identity, and they went and they saw the Palestinians struggling for the things that they thought were the same things that they were struggling for, and you saw a lot of pro-Palestinian rhetoric in Quebec decades before it was cool, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's diminished significantly because it's a highly secular society, and they take a fair French approach to religion, as opposed to the Anglo world's approach to religion, and they have zero respect for any religion, basically.
Lydia Perovich, this has been wonderful having you on the show. Please, whenever we need to know more about the arts or about politics and the arts, we'd love to have you back on. Please come back anytime.
Will do.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Nachas time. Phoebe, you got any nachas?
I do. So for my column this week for the CJN's website, I reviewed Emily Nussbaum's book, Cue the Sun, and it should be Cue the Sun because it's got an exclamation mark, which comes from actually the Truman Show. It's a quote.
I love how how that was so joyous as opposed to like an imperative. Cue the sun.
It's a great book. It's really, really interesting. I learned a lot. And I also was forced to confront how much reality TV I've seen in my time. I didn't realize I'd watched that much of it. I'm not a big fan of reality TV, but apparently you just kind of can't escape it over the years. I had assigned myself this book because I was looking to see what review copies I had of different books. I wanted to review a book, and I wanted to just have a little break from talking about American politics. Enough. The election happened. I have my thoughts about it. I've written them. I've spoken them, and want to set that aside for now. And then, entirely understandably, the book is a lot about Trump because of The Apprentice and the role that played in presenting Donald Trump to American voters, among other viewers. So it was not the escapism that I might have thought when going for this, but that is not a criticism of the book at all. It is super interesting, and I recommend it. What have you got, Abby?
I will check it out, even though I don't like reality TV, and I really don't watch much of it. But it sounds interesting enough to go check it out.
You may find out that you've seen more of it than you thought. That was my experience.
I am going to not cut and paste, but do something very similar, totally inadvertently, than what I did last week, which was to knock us out a Substack post that I read. So this is from the Taste 101 Substack by an individual named Ruby Justice Thalot, who apparently is an adjunct professor at NYU. He calls himself a cyber ethnographer. And the piece is called In Praise of Gatekeeping, Why We Need Gatekeepers to Resist Cultural Hyper-Optimization. And in a really beautifully written post about the videos for Charlie XCX's latest song, as well as Kendrick Lamar's latest song, and dipping into René Girard and French continental philosophy. He really talks about how the world does need gatekeepers. Really, really interesting way to think about how culture is consumed and how there are people who hold on to taste, and they're the real holders of traditions and within culture and stuff like that. And it made me think about the nature of religion and how there are gatekeepers and enthusiasts in religion as well, and how there is an interplay between them, and that the enthusiast gets to be an enthusiast and dip their toes into various faith traditions, like baking challah, as we've discussed in the past, or celebrating a tradition in a very mild way, because the gatekeepers are there maintaining and holding on to these traditions in a much deeper way, and that the relationship is a lot deeper than you would otherwise imagine, and just gave me a lot of food for thought.
Well, that sounds great. I don't care about taste or culture, but I will check it out anyway. Just
you
kidding.
Care about taste.
I'm kidding, Avi. I'm making a joke. I'm making a joke.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending November 30th, Shabbat Parashat Toldot. The show is produced by Michael Fraiman, edited by Zach Kauffman, and the executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Fraiman. Our music is by SoCalled. We are a project for the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways we get new listeners. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.